Verses 1 to 8. Here is, great preparation made for the cursing of Israel. That which was aimed at was to engage the God of Israel to forsake them, and either to be on Moab's side or to stand neuter. Oh, the sottishness of superstition, to imagine that God will be at men's beck. Balaam and Balak think to bribe him with altars and sacrifices, offered without any warrant or institution of his, as if he would eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats. Ridiculous nonsense, to think that these would please God, and gain his favor, when there could be in them no exercise either of faith or obedience. Yet, it should seem, they offered these sacrifices to the God of heaven, the supreme Numen divinity, and not to any of their local deities. But the multiplying of altars was an instance of their degeneracy from the religion of their ancestors, and their apostasy to idolatry, for those that multiplied altars multiplied gods. Ephraim made many altars to sin, Hos 8:11. Thus they liked not to retain God in their knowledge, but became vain in their imaginations, and yet presumptuously expected hereby to gain God over to them from Israel, who had his sanctuary among them, and his anointed altar. Observe here how very imperious Balaam was, proud to have the command of a king and to give law to princes. Such is the spirit of that wicked one who exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped. With what authority does Balaam give orders? Build me here, in the place I have pitched upon, 7 altars of stone or turf. Thus he covers his malice against Israel with a show of devotion, but his sacrifice was an abomination, being brought with such a wicked mind. Prov 21:27. That which he aimed at was not to honor God with the sacrifices of righteousness, but to enrich himself with the wages of unrighteousness. How very obsequious Balak was! The altars were presently built, and the sacrifices prepared, the best of the sort, 7 bullocks and 7 rams. Balak makes no objection to the charge, nor does he snuff at it, or think it either a weariness or a disparagement to stand by his burnt offering as Balaam ordered him. The turning of the curse into a blessing, by the overruling power of God, in love to Israel, which is the account Moses gives of it, Do. 23:5. God puts the blessing into the mouth of Balaam. While the sacrifices were burning, Balaam retired, he went solitary, into some dark grove on the top of the high place, v3, Marg. Thus much he knew, that solitude gives a good opportunity for communion with God. Those that would meet with him must retire from the world, and the business and conversation of it, and love to be private, reckoning themselves never less alone than when alone, because the Father is with them. Enter therefore into thy closet, and shut the door, and be assured that God will meet thee if thou seek him in the due order. But Balaam retired with a peradventure only, having some thoughts that God might meet him, but being conscious to himself of guilt, and knowing that God had lately met him in anger, he had reason to speak doubtfully, Peradventure the Lord will come to meet me, v3. But let not such a man think that he shall receive any favor from God. Nay, it should seem, though he pretended to go and meet with God, he really designed to use enchantments, CCH 24:1. But, whatever he intended, God designed to serve his own glory by him, and therefore met Balaam, v4. What communion has light with darkness? No friendly communion, we may be sure. Balaam's way was still perverse, and God was still an adversary to him, but, Balak having chosen him for his oracle, God would constrain him to utter such a confession, to the honor of God and Israel, as should render those forever inexcusable who should appear in arms against them. When Balaam was aware that God met him, probably by an angel, he boasted of his performances, I have prepared 7 altars, and offered upon every altar a bullock and a ram. How had he done it? It cost him nothing, it was done at Balak's expense, yet he boasts of it, as if he had done some mighty thing. The acts of devotion which are done in hypocrisy are commonly reflected upon with pride and vainglory. Thus the Pharisee went up to the temple to boast of his religion, Lu 18:11-12. He insists upon it as a reason why God should gratify him in his desire to curse Israel, as if now he had made God his debtor, and might draw upon him for what he pleased. He thinks God is so much beholden to him for these sacrifices that the least he can do in recompense for them is to sacrifice his Israel to the malice of the king of Moab. Note, it is a common cheat that wicked people put upon themselves, to think that by the shows of piety they may prevail with God to countenance them, and connive at them, in their greatest immoralities, especially in persecution, Isa 66:5. However, thought the sacrifice was an abomination, God took the occasion of Balaam's expectation to put a word into his mouth, v5, for the answer of the tongue if from the Lord, and thus he would show how much those are mistaken who say, with our tongue we will prevail, our lips are our own, PS 12:4. He that made man's mouth knows how to manage it, and to serve his own purposes by it. This speaks terror to daring sinners, that set their mouth against the heavens. God can make their own tongues to fall upon them, PS 64:8. And it speaks comfort to God's witnesses, whom at any time he calls out to appear for him. If God put a word into the mouth of Balaam, who would have defied God and Israel, surely he will not be wanting to those who desire to glorify God and edify his people by their testimony, but it shall be given them in that same hour what they should speak. Balaam pronounces the blessing in the ears of Balak. He found him standing by his burnt sacrifice, v6, closely attending it, and earnestly expecting the success. Those that would have an answer of peace from God must abide by the sacrifice, and attend on the Lord without distraction, not weary in well-doing. Balaam, having fixed himself in the place appointed for his denouncing curses against Israel, which perhaps he had drawn up in form ready to deliver, takes up his parable, and it proves a blessing, v7. He pronounces Israel safe and happy, and so blesses them. He pronounces them safe, and out of the reach of his envenomed darts. He owns that the design was to curse them, that Balak sent for him out of his own country, and that he came, with that intent, v7. The message sent to him was, "Come, curse me Jacob, and come, defy Israel." Balak intended to make war upon them, and he would have Balaam to bless his arms, and to prophesy and pray for the ruin of Israel. He owns the design defeated, and his own inability to accomplish it. He could not so much as give them an ill word or an ill wish. How shall I curse those whom God has not cursed? v8. Not that therefore he would not do it, but therefore he could not do it. This is a fair confession, first, of the weakness and impotency of his own magic skill, for which others valued him so much, and doubtless he valued himself no less. He was the most celebrated man of that profession, and yet owns himself baffled. God had warned the Israelites not to use divination, Leviticus 19:31, and this providence gave them a reason for that law, by showing them the weakness and folly of it. As they had seen the magicians of Egypt befooled, so, here, the great conjurer of the East. See Isa 47:12-14. Secondly, it is a confession of the sovereignty and dominion of the divine power. He owns that he could do no more than God would suffer him to do, for God could overrule all his purposes, and turn his counsels headlong. Thirdly, it is a confession of the inviolable security of the people of God. God's Israel are owned and blessed of him. He has not cursed them, for they are delivered from the curse of the law. He has not defied them, nor rejected or abandoned them, though mean and vile. Those that have the good will of heaven have the ill will of hell. The serpent and his seed have an enmity to them. Though the enemies of God's people may prevail far against them, yet they cannot curse them, that is, they cannot do them any real mischief, much less a ruining mischief, for they cannot separate them from the love of God. Rom 8:39.